All right. Hello. Welcome to the podcast. This Independent Creatives Podcast, where I interview independent writers, artists, comic artists. Today we have Chris Fisk, who created Infinitale Chronicles. You want to give us a brief introduction?
Hey, how's it going? Infinitale Chronicles is a graphic novel series based on a tabletop role playing game system that I developed almost 30 years ago. We've got a basically the series is pretty grim for a bunch of teenagers now that I think about it. And it's the whole high fantasy thing. It's basically kind of an origin story of the Fey races that we kind of take for granted in the fantasy tropes. The Aoshi, the Seelie, the Unseelie, all that stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, give me a second. I'm going to pull up, I'm going to share my screen. I'll take a look at some of this because the art in this book is really nice, man. I got to tell you. Yeah. So this is one of your books here.
Yep. That's book two.
How many pages was the first book?
54 pages.
54
And
pages.
Yep, it's available on Amazon too, and I believe it's international. So, good thing about print on demand like that is that I don't have to keep inventory and ship it myself.
So what was the process like as far as putting the first book together?
Um, I
Are,
had no idea
are
what I
you
was doing.
okay?
yeah,
Well, are you the artist as well? Are you the artist and the writer?
no, I'm just the writer. Hashtag
Okay.
just the writer. um, yeah, so I reached out to a company called High Concept Media Properties back in about I think it was 2017 because what the original Infinitale Chronicles was just the chronicled game sessions of the tabletop role playing game, and I had converted it all into a screenplay format because I was I don't know high on life. I thought I could be a little more ambitious. Wanted to make an animated film and all that stuff, and then I realized the resources that needed to go into making animation and I showed what I had to Zen, and he's like, "Yeah, we got to put this into a comic book script format." And we worked together for about 6 months. I brought in some of the concept art I used for the tabletop role playing game that I had been working on as well, and that was allowed Zen to contact a couple of artists. We had Antonio Brendo from, I believe he's from Portugal, and Alzir Alves, our colorist from, I believe he's from Brazil. And yeah, two of them used my concept art and my years of outsourcing art when I was in the gaming industry as a creative director, trying to basically uh, use as few words as possible to guide people who don't speak English.
Mm.
Get you to do art for get them to do art for you. So I would assemble various art reference packages, and then we kind of worked from there. And that's how book one came out.
Yeah, I mean it's really impressive how much the level of finish it is that you got with this book. And this book ended up doing uh, what was it like 8,350. So how did you build this audience for this? Like, was it just posting consistently on Twitter? Was it doing podcasts? Like, what did you find was uh, the thing that actually made people back your campaign?
I would say I think there was a little pie chart in the like the tools that Indiegogo gives you,
Mhm.
and it shows basically it showed that the majority of backers for Infinitale Chronicles Book One were from various YouTube sites. So I think the podcasting or the the YouTube streams were by far the most effective, or at least for me, to get the word out and to get people interested and direct them to this product. Um, yeah, the Indiegogo itself didn't really promote it at all. And my limited use of social media outside of YouTube was Twitter or X now. And I mean, that directed some traffic, but the majority seemed to have been from some big YouTuber channels.
Okay. Were these YouTubers that you did interviews with, or these are just people that discovered your thing and put their audience onto it?
I think kind of both. For example, let me let's see. Well, there was a couple of YouTubers that were clearly, it was from like I watched the backing numbers rise after going on a live stream with them. But where is it? Um, the Legion of Myth, for example, he never interviewed me or anything, but I definitely got a lot of traffic from him as well. So yeah, super grateful for that.
Okay. So as you get ready to, you're going to be launching the second book on
Mhm.
Indiegogo soon.
Yep.
So what are you going to be doing differently this time in terms of like the way that you promote? Is there something that you're going in and thinking like, okay, if I change up my strategy a little bit, then maybe I can double what it is that I funded before? Like, what is your takeaways from the first?
Well, to all the backers of the first book, I sent out a survey, and I got a pretty decent reply back on what they liked, what they didn't like, what they want to see more of, what they really didn't care about. So I
Mm-hmm.
took that into consideration when I started considering the perks and stuff for the book two campaign. In addition to that, I also started looking at you know basically we got feedback from our art. The some of the art feedback was they liked it or they didn't like it or whatever. And I thought, well, what if I experiment? And I actually made a second alternative art team book for book two. So
Mm.
when you're doing the previews for book two, you actually have the same story told by two different art teams.
Oh wow, that's cool. That's a cool idea.
Yeah, what I'm hoping to do with that is some A/B testing to see which one would be more successful in terms of the art direction that we're going. Do we stay the course with the original art team, which you see here in the
Mm-hmm.
version A, or do
Mm-hmm.
we go with the alternative art team, which is version B below? Um, so yeah, here's the same exact book done with a different art team. So yeah, same story, just told
Ah,
yeah, two different windows into the same universe. So in addition to that, I'm also composing a black and white manga edition that I'm hoping would entice manga readers, because one thing I noticed, especially with a lot of the independents, was there are very specific genres that the independent comics people liked, or at least had a larger draw. And unfortunately, the Infinitale Chronicles was kind of like trying to sell a power ballad to a bunch of death metal heads, or
okay.
yeah. So I'm one like again. I'm experimenting with manga. So I've got the was it the Jumiko no Tyson, which is the War of the Trees Volume One, which is a black and white version of what we're seeing here, and it's a Volume One and Volume Two. So we'll have Book One and Book Two in black and white and shrunk down to the smaller form factor of a manga book. And in addition to that, it can be read from right to left.
That's cool. That's a cool way to do it. Are you gonna? I'm guessing you're gonna translate it into Japanese.
Um, so here's the thing is but
Hmm.
basically I will be utilizing one of manga's visual storytelling aspects, which is all of the sound effects will be written in kanji or katakana or whatever.
Hmm.
But the actual dialogue will still remain English, so that we get that English kind of, or at least for my Western market, I want to capture, what they call the weeb market. um, like for example, I got an 18-year-old nephew who loves manga. Doesn't read comics, doesn't like comics, but he's got a huge library of manga books. And he's going to be one of my guinea pigs. And be like, hey, what do you think of this? And if he thinks it sucks, hey, give it to one of your friends. What do they think?
Mhm. Yeah, that is an interesting thing. Is like, it's not unusual to find some people are really big into manga and hate comics, or the other way around.
Hmm.
I, I guess I would have to say that I lean more towards manga, just because of it feels like there's a lot more variety of stories that people take on, as
Hmm.
opposed to the American comic book scene. A lot of it feels like, for some reason we just keep going back to like superhero stuff, which is
Hmm.
cool. But after a while, it just kind of loses its appeal, especially after the last like 4 or 5 years of being hit over the head with every major character's origin story. Uh, you know, yeah. What
Yep.
is what is your take on the difference, like on people's perceptions between manga and comics? Like, what have you noticed?
Well, from the media themselves, like if you were to make a distinction in the actual, like, what is in their hands, the manga is like, just to use a World War II analogy, manga are the Sherman tanks, where American comics, or especially these boutique full color comics that we're making here in the West, are like the German Tiger tank. And basically we know what won World War II. It was attrition. Get as many of these Sherman tanks out as quickly as possible. Yeah, sure, they were smaller and they couldn't take a beating or anything, but they were really easy to produce and they were really easy to get out there. And one thing I learned in development early on is something called fail fast or fail quickly, which that affords manga that agile sense of development, where they can fire off a thousand failures, but if they can get one success, that one success is going to be huge. And manga doesn't cost that much to produce. I mean, the books are relatively cheap to make. A lot of them are just using newsprint. They're all line art and all that stuff. And they make heavy use of zipatones instead of actual, like, color shading.
Mhm.
Um, and that's kind of where I'm putting out my manga version. Is it'll be 160 pages for like $5. Like,
Yeah.
that's pretty impressive. Like, I mean, yeah, the full color version, will probably be you know possibly 3 times that price, but
Yeah.
fewer pages but full color.
Yeah, and so for that amount of pages for that price, you're saying that that's what it is that you would sell it to the customer for, or that's what
Yeah.
it is that it would cost to produce?
If I'm trying to get the production costs as low as possible without compromising quality.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's about what I'm trying to aim for a target, is to basically get it in a customer's hands for $5 for the book, and then possibly $5 for like media mail, for shipping. The no frills, like, you got the book before anybody else. Because most manga books, if you go to a manga shop, those things are like 190 pages. Like, I got the Vinland Saga over here, and these things are 400 pages a pop, and there's like 14 books.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. It's yeah, it's such a cool time to do something creative. I mean, you have so many options for what you can do, and it looks like you're already doing really well. I mean, you made over 8 grand off of the first book, and the second one looks awesome. I love the art for both of these. Both of these look
Awesome.
really cool. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, it's interesting because they're very distinctly different art styles.
Mhm.
And I found that, like, it's going to be rough if I get an equilibrium of sales. Like, that's going to be real, real, but like, I've had people comment where they're like, well, I really, really like this from Team A, but I really, really like this from Team B. So it's going to be tough for them to decide which one. And I'm like, why not both? You know?
Yeah. So you worked as a narrative designer for games before you
Yes.
started doing comics. How did you become a narrative designer for games? Like, did you just because I know this whole thing started from a tabletop uh, game that you were designing at one point.
Mhm.
Did you just have that like as a portfolio piece? Like, how did you end up in gaming?
So I think the narrative design probably came about from when I was working on the Defiance game at Triumph Worlds, where I was hired on as a content designer, which is like a combat scenario slash encounter designer. We were making a shooter MMO essentially. And
Mhm.
it was this open world game, and people needed to create combat scenarios. We had these things called, they were like these public events called Arc Falls. And I worked with a couple of really talented designers that were a hell of a lot better than me. But I was able to kind of learn how to develop for emergent gameplay, and a lot of that it revolves around storytelling. Like you have to visually communicate a story without, and like there's no exposition, so that you have to basically tell a story without telling a story, if that makes any sense. And I was also when I was brought on, I was astounded by the fact that we were basically collaborating with NBC Universal. Like we had the Sci-Fi Channel, they were launching our TV show, and we had no real like our design doc was like an absolute mess. And I went through and I took it upon myself in my spare time and built them out their entire design bible in a Wikipedia, like an internal wiki, and basically made it so that it could be leveraged to the TV show or whatever. And it's like, look, you click on this little button and you hear my voice pronouncing these weird alien words, like so that there was nothing left to be ambiguous, because when you're on a TV show filming schedule, like if you don't get an answer instantaneously, you have to make it up, and then like consequences be damned, because you need to maintain that shooting schedule, because every minute that you're wasting trying to dig through information that may or may not be there, that's costing studios money. So yeah, I worked with that, and I think I leveraged a lot of that from when I was working on Firefall at Red 5 Studios, where I also worked on their documentation. And one of the things that they really liked that I did was I did a lot of infographics. They called it fiskifying. They're like, hey, we have this really long, boring document that nobody's going to read. Can you fiskify it? So I'd make it into a pretty infographic. And at one point, we actually had all of the infographics printed out in giant posters and like hung up on the common room walls. And we got to see engineers come over and get real angry at them. They want us to do what? Yeah. So yeah, by the time I went over to the Ubisoft stuff, it was, hey, yeah, you've got almost 10 years experience writing stuff up. Let's see how you can work with this. And lo and behold, I started you know crafting up stories, doing a lot of research. My God, the Assassin's Creed universe, like the amount of documentation that exists there, and the stories and all the stuff you have to like I do not envy continuity designers, or because it's like so much to keep track of.
Well, I
Yeah.
feel like I know we talked about it before, not to poo-poo your previous employer, but I think the continuity has pretty much been thrown out the window at this
Oh
point.
God, yeah.
It's
Yeah. Assassin's Creed 3 was pretty much the beginning of the end. When they decided to kill off their meta story, which was basically all of these Assassin's Creed adventures you were going through were basically was the main hero Desmond collecting all of his ancestral assassin skills to culminate in a final showdown in a near future utopic war or battle with Abstergo, which is the modern embodiment of the Templars, and they completely scrapped that idea. And yeah, they had a regime change, and a new narrative team came in, and we did not want to have the assassins versus the Templars. So now we are going to have a love story in Assassin's Creed Unity. No, it's like, yeah, that one sucked.
Yeah, I can't really imagine many other franchises that have fallen off as hard as Assassin's Creed, but people still love it. You keep hoping that they'll pull it together in some way, and it'll go back to to the way the second one was. You know, like that
Yeah,
whole trilogy for the second one was it was so
Ezio.
classic. Yeah, I mean, like just the fact that they put Da Vinci in there, I thought
Yep.
was really cool. I loved that element of it, and thinking like, oh my god, like this is like a really fresh take on something, you know, because
Mhm.
it just naturally makes you interested in the history of what it is that they're covering, and uh, and so you kind of expected that that was going to continue, but yeah, it got corporatized.
Yep. Yeah, too many cooks in the kitchen. Designed by committee.
Yeah, I guess that's what's so interesting and exciting to me about talking to people that are doing their own thing, like whether it's you or some of the other people that I've had on recently.
Hmm.
Um, it just it's really cool to see people do something that is specifically them. You know, it's not something that you have a team of people necessarily. Where I mean, you do have a team, but you know what I mean. You're
Hmm.
pretty
Hmm.
much making all the creative decisions as opposed to being designed by a committee.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it's kind of like, in a sense, it is like a kind of a vanity project in regards to that, because you're basically, sink or swim. It really falls on you, even if you've got great talented artists working with you and all this stuff, but if your core product doesn't have a coherent story or a compelling story that connects with an audience, then ultimately it'll fail. And when you own it, when you own it, you own both the success and the failure.
Mhm, mhm. And so, have you experienced like something falling flat with your audience that you weren't expecting it to?
um not in the actual books themselves.
Okay.
But when I was beta testing out my game, I learned early on that strangers, like, 10-year-old kids, 9-year-old kids that don't know you, have some of the most brutal feedback you will ever get.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I remember, again, when I was in the gaming industry, we had a focus group, and they were giving feedback on uh, just various design systems or scenarios we were running through. And like, this guy's like, whoever designed this should be publicly beaten. And I look over at one of the designers, and he's got that old 80s commercial where the Native American is standing on the side of the highway and they throw the trash, and he just looks at the camera and his hair comes down. He's like, yeah, man, I feel that sucks.
So when does your next book go live on Indiegogo?
Well, we're aiming for, initially I said quarter 1 of 2024, but I'm at the mercy of two art teams, and they've had various kind of slowdowns here and there. So we're possibly looking at quarter 2, and I hope I don't have to push it off to quarter 3. Um, uh, but sometime either between June and August, we'll be kicking off the next campaign. And then the reason why it needs to be prior to that is because in September I'll be attending the Granite State Comic Con, and
Okay.
it was kind of suck to go to a Comic Con and not have a product to sell.
Right. Totally. Okay. So that'll be at the latest middle of this year.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and how many books do you have planned for this? Do you know what
So
your overall?
yeah, we like, so I got the entire script is already written out. I've had proofreaders tear into it and tell me what they liked, what they hated, what should just completely get chopped, in terms of pacing, making sure that, it has that nice that peak and trough to keep people like interested but not overwhelmed. And then at the same time, you don't want to have long periods of boring, like two heads talking kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm planning for 10 books for this what I'm calling the War of the Trees saga, which is basically the origin of the elves and all this stuff. But there might be some kind of like like side story books as well. Some supplementary stories. Those may or may not happen based on how much resources I have available to me. And then I'm also trying to get out the tabletop role playing game system, which wow, that's a lot more complicated than the comics.
So this could eventually be a whole series of books that are also connected to a tabletop game. That's kind of the way you envision it.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that idea. I like the idea of the transmedia stuff. I think that the the crowdfunding scene is kind of perfect for something like that, right? Like you have a comic, and then you build up an audience with that, and then you can take it into something like a tabletop game or something along those lines.
Yeah, and it's also a good kind of a like a litmus test on how what the interest is in what you're providing. Like if you get no bites, don't maybe you might want to reevaluate. Like
Mhm.
maybe the tabletop market's dried up by the time I get it out there, and it's like, oh well, at least I didn't foot the entire thing myself, and you know.
Yeah, but I mean, it seems like if you have an audience, and then if you're always just adding value to that audience that's already interested in what you do, I don't know how much crossover there would be between comics and tabletop guys, but I imagine there's got to be some degree of crossover for sure.
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was. I just remembered that ElfQuest, one of the comics that I read when I was a kid, is getting an animated series. And even though it is, a very similar genre, very similar stuff, it gives me hope because I'm watching somebody that's been doing this for a lot longer than me, and it's market analysis. It's basically it's like if that thing bombs, it's like, oh, well, no, I'm not. I shouldn't be going in the animated series route.
So what is the process like whenever you were writing these books? Because I know you said that this essentially came out of a tabletop game
Yep.
that you were designing, and that these stories were basically like they were like the foundation for your game.
Yeah. So
Correct.
so the reason why it's called Infinitale is it's a portmanteau of infinite and tale. And the idea is that that's its kind of like its kitsch, its novelty from try to separate itself from other role playing game systems, where it actually has a mechanically driven storytelling element, where it's almost like a collaborative, impromptu or improv storytelling system, where I ended up researching. Oh God, this was before before Google. I had full reign of the Pelham Public Library in my hometown, and I tore through that library for various uh, like folklore and uh, just various books that I would assume that J.R.R. Tolkien probably used to inspire his Lord of the Rings. Like I looked into Finnish folklore for things like the Kalevala. I looked into Icelandic folklore for things like Snorri Sturluson's The Wolf Song Saga. I looked into Welsh mythology with things like the Mabinogia. And in fact, The War of the Trees is actually a highly disputed story or poem in the Mabinogia, which is called Cadgatho, or The War of the Trees. And I took bits and pieces of these, and I kind of aerosolized them out into various aspects. Like, oh, that's kind of a cool thing, or oh, hey, oh, there's a magical ring that needs to be destroyed because it's controlling people. Okay, like all these different elements. And the way that the Infinitel role-playing game system worked is no two games are the same. Because that was one of the things that always bothered me about Dungeons and Dragons. You bought this module, you read through the module, and as a player, if you read through that module, you know exactly how this adventure is going to go. Like, you're going to get shuttled down this path. Like, in video game terms or in game design terms, we refer to it as railroading. The opposite of a railroading is like a sandbox where it's super freeform with almost no structure, which is like most Assassin's Creed games now. But so the idea was, when I'm building these stories, I'm building them from components of all these different mythologies and folklore and whatever from various cultures, and then I'm presenting them into 3 or 5 act structure of a story. And the way that the Infinitel system worked was, it was like you have a scene, you have a scenario, and then that leads into another plot point, and you go from like the rising action to the climax to the descending action or falling action, and then to the conclusion and all that. But during each one of those plot points or each one of those story beats, there's like the possibility to diverge from it, and you can diverge from it as much as you want. Before you instead of the dungeon master in Infinitel, you have the narrator, and they can create as many scenarios as they want. They can kind of like splinter out from what people might think is going to happen. So you get those snippy players that are like, oh, I know where this story is heading. And you're like, oh, really? And then you just throw a complete curveball in there. And it provides a means for you to sustain an actual coherent narrative structure, but at the same time, you're not railroading your players, and it feels more organic when they're actually playing through the story rather than your typical Dungeons and Dragons game, which either devolves into a bunch of murder hobos that meet up in a bar and then go into a cave and kill a bunch of dragons and stuff, or or it's this like super rigid, like don't deviate from the story, which I find incredibly stifling. And that's what kind of was the magic out of this, was that the main character, or one of the main characters, because it's a multi-generational story, we see here on my little portrait here, is Ashling, and she was played by a real girl. Like there was an actual player that played her, and all of the decisions and all of her dialogue was taken straight from her. Granted, there's a little bit of finessing here and there when I translated it into the comic, but more or less those are the actions that she took in that story, or her player took in that story, along with the other one of the other main protagonists, Kaylin, her husband, who was played by another player. And all of those actions that they took were completely organic. It wasn't like I said, here's a completely linear story that I wrote out, now go and pretend to fall through every one of these like story beats. It was more of I made a bazillion story beats, like threw spaghetti at the wall, and whatever stuck, that's what the path these players took, and it came out. It manifested itself into a very coherent story. So a very pretty moving one, where it was like, wow, like I remember we had game sessions afterwards. It was like, dude, man, you just depressed the hell out of me, ruined my day. So
yeah, that's an interesting way of approaching narrative. Like, I think I heard Ken Levine talking about designing a game system that was similar to that, to where you basically have, it's a narrative that you're breaking down into these modular parts.
Yep.
And then you're fitting them together in a way that feels organic. That's really interesting. So you're basically like writing out these individual modules are like story beats of what it is that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like how do you do that? Like what do you mean?
Well, so I guess off the cuff, I can think of something like when you're building a scene. So you're in your call to action. You're right before the rising action. Your very opening, your prologue or whatever. You're in your the beginning of your hero's journey. It becomes, okay, write a scene. Okay, well, what would be the possible outcomes of this scene? And like, for example, we would have one where a bunch of these player characters woke up. They're all strangers, and they woke up in this I don't know, on this battlefield near like a burning building or tower that was just blown apart, and they have no memory of what the hell happened. And they all find out that there's a big snowstorm or some type of inclement weather that's keeping them from just going off, wandering off, because they don't know where the hell they are, so they don't want to die to the elements. And they get into this building, and they find themselves surrounded by these books, and these books are all have these same symbols that match these weird, almost tattoo-like objects on each of the players. Random, they'd be like, okay, this book has this book has this, whatever. And then from there, suddenly it's like, okay, what are we going to do with this story? Like, we just put in a hook. We just put in this mystery, like, or as J.J. Abrams, and I hate referencing him for storytelling because my God, that man never delivers. But you just created your mystery box. You got people interested. Like, oh, well, okay, we've got these tattoos, we got these strange books. What are we got? Maybe we should start reading the books. Hey, look, I can read the book. And boom, suddenly I'm now in a different game. I'm in a different story. What's going on here? I'm now in this story within a story. So there's a story inception, the story of the book, the story that was read. And something happens upon creating or completing whatever's in that book, where a piece of a memory was retrieved. And now the players have been returned back to their burnt out area, or their burnt out tower, and that book is gone, but now they have memories that have returned. And then that moves into the next rising action, where it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to complete this entire library, get all of our memories back? Okay, our memories are now giving us calls to action, or giving us filling in pieces of what actually led us to this burned out tower. Oh, it turns out that this tower belonged to some evil wizard or something, and it's his last victims. Like, we kicked his ass. That's awesome. And then it's okay, well, maybe it isn't an evil wizard. Maybe it was a good wizard. Maybe you guys aren't the real people that you think you are. Maybe you're golems. Maybe you aren't even alive anymore. Maybe those people that you read in those stories existed 1,000 years ago. All these little scenarios start popping into play. And it's almost like when you hear people discuss like a fortune telling, where they're like, the future isn't set. I see millions of possibilities. Well, that's where as a narrator, it's your job to kind of read the room. And you're like, oh, okay, now we're heading in this direction, or now we're heading in this other direction, or we gotta throw in a peak, or we gotta throw in a valley, because the players are either getting too amped up or they're getting too bored. So we start putting in those rising actions. We start putting in scenarios and so on. And these are all pre-packaged modules, these miniature little pieces, like a puzzle that you're putting together. And then at the end of the game, you can see almost like a roadmap. Like, if you've ever played that game Outrun for the old, the arcade, where it's like, okay, I took a left here, but when I got to the next race course, I took a right instead of a left. So then I went from like the Easter Island to like the Redwoods to Las Vegas, and then I could see the entire map that the course that I mapped out from the beginning to the conclusion. Mm-hmm. And then obviously, there's other pillars, like thing that always bothered me about Dungeons and Dragons was there's no loot chase in that game, which is really weird, because every fantasy game that has been pretty much derived from Dungeons and Dragons, when you get into the video game aspects, everything is loot chase. Like that core game loop of beat up monsters to get experience and loot, to get cooler weapons, to beat up even bigger monsters, and rinse and repeat. Like, that's a very established core gaming loop. And Dungeons and Dragons, the tabletop role-playing game, doesn't really have that, because you'll get players that are like, cool, I got this magic item and I'm never going to lose it. Like, it's literally, I got the best sword in the game already, or the best weapon or best piece of armor, and I'm never going to upgrade this. And it kind of stagnates. So that was another aspect that I kind of drew upon, especially when I had worked on mobile gaming, which I know that's a kind of four-letter word, but like, there are some pretty cool aspects to getting the loot chase in there, especially when you look at things like the MMO quality system where they have like the common, uncommon, rare, epic, legendary items, and they're all color coded. Like, oh, dude, I got a purple. Like, I wanted to bring that aspect into the tabletop role playing game world, and I did that with cards. So we actually make use of equipment and ability and all these other cards. So you're not just staring at a blank piece of paper or a bunch of little lead figurines on a table. You got cards that you can flip through with pretty art on them, and when you're finding that loot or when your weapon breaks, because there is a durability to your weapon. It's not like as bad as Breath of the Wild for the Switch, but weapons do degrade, so you need to maintain your arms and armor. But hey, say you got that badass sword, but it's only a green. Well, guess what? This new whatever event, you just got a purple version, so now you're going to want to trade up or upgrade or whatever. And we can keep doing that, and it probably lasts in perpetuity because I have yet to reach that end where everybody's like, dude, I got everything legendary. I am God. So there's that, and then combat needs to be fun as well. And I've been tooling with the combat system for going on 30 years now, trying to make it something that's engaging, but at the same time not bogged down. And I've had a couple of people tear into it that are also tabletop game designers to get their insights. And it sounds like I'm kind of on the right track. I mean, they were like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool, man. Like, so yeah, can't wait to play test with that more.
It sounds like whenever you're talking about the narrative modules and the way it is that you put these things together, it seems like that would be the perfect thing for training as a writer.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah. Well, that's why I feel like I kind of cheated, where like for my books, even though I am the writer for this, there were other players, there were other people contributing, themselves into it. And, there were like when we were in our early stages, when I was first beta testing some of this stuff, like some of it didn't work, or it was too complex, or, the plot didn't make any sense. And I'm like, I'm not trying to make a Marvel film here. But yeah.
But it seems like it would also be like, have you ever seen one of those, like I think Alan Moore talked about this. I think he uses whenever he gets stumped on a story, he uses these flashcards called oblique cards or something like that. And it's just like a one sentence thing that's just meant to like kind of throw a wrench into your thinking process. And it kind of like gets you thinking creatively again. Because I mean, especially when you're writing something, you can end up, repeating something that you've already written before, or you get kind of like in these ruts, and you want that new perspective, right? And so when I hear you say that about the narrative modules, I almost feel like that in itself could be a product that you could sell to people that are into just writing, that are not even big fans of like tabletop or anything like that, but something that a writer could use as like individual prompts that would then be connected to like modules of like you were saying, rise in action and fall in action and that sort of thing.
Yeah. It also helps in preparation, or helps you to prepare for your story. Like I don't want to brag, but if I ever got arrested, I would definitely have my story straight when the cops interrogated me. but yeah, it just like, when I first started role playing and all this stuff, I was introduced to it as a barely literate, severely dyslexic 12-year-old. One of my friends dragged me to the fantasy club at the library, and I'm like, dude, I'm gonna get my ass beat. Like, they're gonna kick my ass for this. And he's like, no, just do it. Just give it a chance, man. It's like that video game that you played. Just come on. So I went in there, and the librarian was super awesome, super accommodating. She's like, oh, you can draw, and I want you to be our chronicler. And I'm like, what's that? And she's like, I just want you to write down the events as they happen during our game session, and we can charge, as part of the fantasy club, a monthly fee that they will get these letters in the mail to basically recap the previous month's adventure. And you got your little drawings in there, so it feels like there's some value. They're like, wow, I'm paying this $5 a month, or $5 I think it was actually like $1 at the time because it was the 90s. but like $1 a month, and you got this cool newsletter every month in the mail, and it had some of my drawings, and it listed out, what happened. And what I learned early on was like I was a dumb kid, man. Wow. and when you're starting out as a dungeon master, the world is only as big as the dungeon master. So when your players are smarter than you, which was often the case, it really creates a limiting world, where players know more than you about certain things. And it made me become the master of worthless trivia, because like
Oh,
I didn't want to be stupid. Like I
yeah.
didn't want I didn't know that. So like I would grab books off of variously weird, dumb things at the library just to try to learn like herbalism, various types of botany, I don't know, like alchemy, or even Jewish. Was it Jewish esotericism or whatever? Like
Oh,
just
okay.
random stuff. And when we'd have games, like I knew all the parts of the armor, I knew this, I knew that. It was like, yeah, completely worthless, because like you still can't do long division, but you know the difference between a cuirass and a Bernie, or a cuirass and a hauberk, like so.
What was the what was the have you drawn any inspiration from your stories from, like, you said you were into like the Jewish mysticism
Oh
and
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
like that? Like, how has that influenced your creative process? Or
Oh boy. So I looked into, when I was building a magic system, I unwittingly wrote a programming language, and I didn't even know it. So I leveraged a lot of the Hermeticism, the old Jewish mystic stuff,
yeah,
and there's actually a language in the Infinitale Chronicles called Slithith, which is based on Hebrew. It has a lot of similarities to the syntax and structure of the Hebrew language, and the magic system itself is spoken in this Hebrew language, or as I call it, the language of the dragons. And the way spells are crafted is in these like stanzas, as they're called, these like sentence structures using these slirith glyphs, or these letters or these words that represent things. You can actually find it on the website under the lore section, under the magic, and it gives you a list of all of the different glyphs. And yeah, you put it all together, and it reads like it reads like some ancient Jewish scripture. So you're casting a spell. It's
hmm
kind of cool.
that is pretty cool. I mean, I'm into that sort of thing. I'm into the mysticism and mythology and things like that. I feel that there's I mean, obviously there is. I'm looking at your spell. Is it the cantrips, the spell action
Yep.
components?
Yeah. Yeah. So spells are written. The stanzas are composed of cantrips and elements.
Mhm.
So your cantrips are kind of your basic uh, letters in a sentence. They're everything from like I create to I target, I destroy, I transform. See, I to understand, to project, this target, I commune, surround, to at. And if you notice, they're in two different languages. There's the like so to at. There's the in the Andravari, which is based off of Latin, is ad, but then in Slithith, the language of the dragons, it's Ikrat, which is very similar to some Hebrew words. And yeah, those are all composed together. So you've got your cantrips here, and then if you scroll down, you'll see the colored element runes, and they combine to create like the cantrips affect these elemental runes. So
Mm,
I create air, I create fire. I destroy light. I change lightning.
yeah, yeah, man. I mean, you've created like a very in-depth gaming system. But I mean, what's interesting to me about this is that you're drawing so much from the myths and the ideas of just mysticism. I mean,
Hmm.
I can see some of the I mean, obviously the triangle with the eye here.
Yeah.
What what do you think about the mythology and stuff that you draw on? Um, do you have like a respect for it, or do you just look at it as just like kind of basically fodder for fiction? What is your take on mysticism and mythology?
Well, that's the thing about mysticism and mythology is it's an art. It's not a science. And as you know, as such, like it's in my opinion, it's really cool that we're able to preserve it because these are things that like are lost to the ages. There are things that we will never, like when the Library of Alexandria burned, there like that was one of the greatest tragedies of our world is that we've lost all this knowledge that we'll never get back. So when I look into the mysticism, I look into folklore, I want to keep it alive. Even if I am kind of giving it a cheesy Las Vegas-ified version of that stuff, at least I can point people to the origins and be like, "Oh, you want a taste of this, huh? You could go get the real thing. Check out this book, or go read the Wall Song Saga books, or the Kalevala, or various other folklore books." And it's anything to get people interested in things other than like how dumbed down everything has become, to make it like mass consumption or easy to consume. So I feel like the stuff that I utilize isn't so much that I'm just trying to create a cheap knockoff of it, so much
Right.
as I'm trying to abridge it to the point where it's a gateway drug to the real stuff. So it's like, oh, you like this? Well, here's an inspiration that you might also like.
So what do you think? What do you think about it, about myth and the mysticism? I mean, there's like clearly a connection between these two.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, religion, myth, mysticism, all of these things basically served a purpose in people's lives at one point.
Mm.
And stories specifically, right? It shapes it, it's so important because it shapes the way that we look at ourselves, and that shapes the way that we interact with people and whatnot. And
Mm-hmm.
in this strange way, it's been commodified. It's been turned into like this cheap commercial thing
Mm-hmm.
that's supposed to be there that entertains you, for half an hour, keeps your mind occupied, and then that's pretty much it. It's just like candy, right?
Mm.
But why do you think that these stories that you're drawing upon, why do you think that they're worth preserving? What makes them different from the commodification of media in general?
Oh, that's a good one. I would say the reason why like you should care about stories or good stories in general is that even though we are seeing a lot of that dumbed down or commodification of modern day storytelling, a good story is something that you think about long after you've experienced it. And there's lessons to be learned. There's morals to these stories. There's for example, have you ever seen Logan's Run or read the book
Uh,
Logan's Run?
I've seen Logan Run a long time ago. You'll have to remind me.
Oh yeah. It's the people are basically they live until they're in their 30s, and they got those little dots on their hand, and when they turn 30 it turns red, and they have to go to
Okay.
this thing called carousel where they basically get killed.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's nobody over the age of 30 there. And the main protagonist of Logan's Run, Logan, is somebody that's he's basically tasked by this AI like custodian that rules this like science fiction utopia of young pretty people with no problems. He's what they call a sandman. He's the one of the people that when somebody turns 30 and their hand starts blinking red, they're like, I don't want to go to carousel. I don't want to die. Oh, we got a runner. Somebody's not going. So they have
Okay.
these people called the Sandman that go and hunt them down and kill them. And so Logan, he basically gets tasked to find out that there's this like secret resistance group. So the AI basically says, we're going to make you a runner. We're going to artificially age you up to 30 or over 30 pretend that you're a runner so that you can infiltrate these camps, lead our Sandmen men to it, and we can wipe them out, and then we can return back to our utopia. And unfortunately, in his experience as being a runner, he's suddenly awakened to this new world of like what's really going on. And the utopia he thought he lived in is actually a whole big dystopia. And that is actually based off of a much, much older story, Plato's allegory of the cave, where the slaves that have lived in the cave and only saw the shadows that were presented on the cave walls by their owners, essentially. That was their reality. They never saw anything beyond the shadows in the cave. And one day, if a slave gets freed, escapes the cave, the real world explains what's out there, and he comes back to free his comrades and saying, "Guys, there's a whole better world out there. It's more than just dimly lit walls with shadows." And they don't believe him, and they basically try to kill him. They don't want to
Yeah.
go. And that's I leveraged that in the Infinitale Chronicles. In fact, book one opens with these pretty people with problems. I mean, imagine being this eternally youthful being that's never going to know the betrayals of age. You never get sick. You look like you're straight out of Southern California. Always pretty. Nobody's fat and ugly. Everybody's perfect. And all you have to do is just whatever the gods tell you to do, whatever your your parental the basically the institution tells you to do. And one day the chick ends up getting pregnant, which is weird because very few pregnancies have ever been recorded. And just like with the carousel in Logan's Run, they have this weird system set up by their gods that say every time, every full moon, and the moon system works considerably different on this planet than it does in our own. So every time there's a harvest moon, a lottery is taken, and one or more members of this, like this, what sovereignty, a queendom, essentially. Uh, People have their names drawn from the lottery to go be harvested to the gods or sacrificed to the gods. And what the story kicks off is that everything was going right, everything was going perfect, and then this chick gets pregnant, and she pops out a kid, and the kid is now had his name instantly drawn, like didn't even get a chance to live a full year of life, and now they're like, "Yep, this kid's destined to be sacrificed to the gods," and she freaks out. She's like, "Oh hell no!" Like you're not taking my kid. Like so,
No.
it starts to unravel that utopian illusion, and she realizes that she's not in this perfect world and that everything starts falling down around her, and it gets really violent, and everything that she's been taught that was bad might not be bad, and everything she's taught that was good might not be good.
Yeah, that's a really interesting hook. I like that. That is so the influences that you're talking about, like the Plato's cave.
Mhm.
Um, to me, that's an interesting interpretation of that story, and I think what's interesting about story is like it's they're almost infinitely fractal, right? Like you can pull
Mhm.
different things from it depending on your perspective.
Mhm.
Um, to me, I kind of look at that as uh, Plato's idea that we basically the way that I take that story is that
Mhm.
the physical world that we're looking at is basically a shadow of the real reality, which is like just the imagination. Like
Mhm.
everything exists already complete in the imagination, and we have the ability to tap into that and to bring things from this realm where nothing is actually manifest, and we have the ability to actually bring something into this physical world.
Mhm.
And it seems like we're very much distracted by the fact that we have this 3D world in front of us and we think that's all it is.
Mhm.
Um, I feel like so much of dystopian fiction is kind of based around that. Like what I'm doing, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at any of the stuff that I do, but
Mhm.
basically, I'm taking Philip K. Dick. I'm sure you know who he is.
Oh yeah.
Um, I'm taking his public domain short stories and I'm turning them into comics, but at the same time, I have this YouTube project that I'm doing where I'm basically going through his journals
Mhm.
and I'm looking at some of the influences and his inspirations because he had a journal published by his family, and it's just basically him just going over his musings of like some of the mystical experiences that he had, and trying to follow a thread from like Blade Runner, Minority Report, and some of his other stories, and
Mhm.
following that thread into his journals and making videos about it. And what you just said there to me, it immediately reminded me of like the core story of Blade Runner. I mean,
Mhm.
it's very similar in that sense of like you have this person that is basically sent to retire androids, right?
Mhm.
And he he thinks that he's doing something noble, or he tricks himself into thinking that he's doing something noble, and then over the course of the story, he finds out that what it is that's really going on. But it's interesting that all of uh, these dystopian stories, they're very similar. It's very much about like the modern man having this wool pulled over his head, and then coming to realize what it is that's really going on around him. Do you know what I
Mm.
mean?
Yeah, the awakening.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny because I read some reviews on the first book, and it it amazed me that people got stuff out of the book that I mean I considered, but at the time when it was written in the 90s, and I was a teenager, and different. I view the world much differently than I do as a 40 something. But for example, there was this one reviewer, and she's like, there's a lot of like it shows that like how the gods are basically like an authoritarian government, and
Mm,
like you've got these freedom fighter. Basically, it's that awful choice of dangerous freedom versus safe oppression.
mhm,
And basically they choose that freedom, and it shows how authoritarians will basically they'll dig in deeper if they feel like something's trying to get free from them. and
mhm,
uh and it's weird because I was like, I kind of thought, but like, in all honesty, another perspective was, it's about a child having to grow up and leave their home, and they could live with their parents for forever, but they'll end up basically rotting and dying like withering on the vine, because they've never had that chance to like be the actual person that they were supposed to be. They just remained as a perpetual child.
yeah, and that's what's so interesting. Like we were saying, that's what's so interesting about stories. Like, it almost seems like I've noticed this with some of the stuff that I've written.
Hmm.
Um, you'll write something, and then at the moment, it doesn't necessarily make any sense to you. But you give it a little bit of space, and you come back to it, and you can see so many different things in it
Oh
that you
yeah.
didn't see before. So it almost feels like, to me, I don't really know how much it is that we create these ideas. I feel like they almost exist, and they're kind of being channeled through you in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, heck, guys, I think that's isn't that what Tesla thought? The whole ether, the
Yeah.
concept of the ether, and it was like, you're just a conduit.
Hmm. Yeah. So do you think that that's what these mystical traditions, these mythical traditions, do you think that they're channeling something, or like what have you learned from your research on like mysticism and mythology that like changed your mind about it?
Well, it's really odd because I've read up on books from everywhere from the Far East, even some Shinto writing,
Okay.
the basically the folklore of Japan,
Okay.
and the what is it, the Hindu, was it the Vajras, or no, the what do
The
they call them,
Upanishads? Is it the
yeah,
Upanishads?
yeah, and then the Zoroastrian Avastas, like all this stuff. And it's weird how, despite the amount of time that's separated them and the amount of land mass that's separating them, there's so many commonalities. Like, the whole, like, the dragon effect, where it's like,
Hmm.
how does people in South America people in Europe and people in Southeast Asia who have never seen each other. Their cultures have been grown up in relative isolation from one of the other. How do they all know what dragons look like? Like how do they all have dragons in their folklore? Like it kind of makes you think maybe there was something out there, And that's the other thing about mysticism is it teaches you that what you think you don't. Science can only answer so much.
So, like, what do you mean by that?
Well, we're learning, especially in modernity, like we have this, everything is solved for us. There's no more mysteries in this world. Everything is this, and this. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this weird curveball gets thrown, and it's like, oh, hey, did you know that, there's like, acupressure and acupuncture actually work? Like for the longest time, people dismissed the whole concept of chi or ki flowing and the chakras and all that stuff. It's just Eastern weird gobbledygook. And then all of a sudden, people are like, it's actually doing something, and it's not a placebo. Like, so maybe science doesn't know everything.
Yeah, it's a weird thing that the West. One of the things that I've noticed from living out here in Thailand is like people take their beliefs very seriously out here.
Mhm.
Like it feels very much like these older traditions are still around, even though modernity is like it's almost like you have these two worldviews, and modernity is most definitely gaining territory on the mystical, and I think that part of that is because we just don't have a way of really talking about it without sounding like you're completely crazy. Um, and maybe that's the role that fantasy and science fiction literature has to fill in order for people to feel connected to these stories. Maybe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, dude, talking about when you're having that contrast of modernity and the old ways. When I lived in Tokyo, it was the most bizarre, but at the same time, I would say strangely beautiful. Was I'm walking through these, walking down the street, and I'm seeing these amazing, like modern skyscrapers and modern designed buildings and stuff. And then I peer down a dark alleyway and I see like a Shinto shrine that's like 1,000 years older than the United States. It's just sitting right there, perfect, like the entire nailless construction, like the temple, the shrine, everything is sitting right there, perfectly preserved, and it's older than the entire country that I was born in. Like,
Yeah, yeah, I have that similar situation out here. Thailand has 40,000 Buddhist temples,
oh yeah,
40,000 of them, and it's such a trip to like walk into one of these temples, and like if you're in the like I'm in Chiang Mai right now.
hmm
If you're in this part of the world, it's very easy to like you almost it's it's one of the most profane forms of like uh, defamation to have like basically a 7-Eleven right next to like one of these temples, like because you almost are under the impression in a way that this temple was built for tourism or something, right? Because there's so many people walking through it and whatnot. But if you have a chance to like go off the beaten path and go to just a random temple and you walk inside, you let your mind just kind of settle on the fact that like this was built several hundred years ago just by a generation of people that lived in this area, and they all came together and they built this temple. You can start to feel that there's some sort of a presence here. There's like an older presence, this older healing presence that's here, and it connects you with humanity in a way it is that modernity can't. Because I feel like so much of modernity is based off of um, like what's your skin color, what's your political stance, what's your societal stance, how much money do you make, all of these different things that rank you in society as being better or worse than. But when you go into like one of these places of worship, you're just reminded of just how mysterious our existence is. Because I
well,
mean,
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, well, people like modernity has distracted us from understanding mortality.
Hmm.
Like you could be the richest king in the world or you could be the poorest pauper in the world. You're all going to be in the same place when it's all said and done with. You're all going to get turned to dirt. Like, I know that sounds grim, but it also is a little it's a little kind of uplifting in the sense that you realize that you know the principles of energy. It cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be changed.
Hmm.
It's like water. You can't destroy water. Okay, you boil it. Okay, it evaporates. It turns into vapor, and then it condenses and comes back down as water. You freeze it. It turns to ice. It never disappears. It just changes forms. So yeah, when you see somebody that's this rich king or whatever, or this rich whatever, they're gonna they're gonna evaporate sooner or later too. They'll come back down. And when you look at things like I'm not fully versed in Buddhism, but I believe they share a lot of tenets similar to like the Hindu concept of the samsara, where you can reincarnate, you have karma, you have dharma, and the more negativity you put into the world, the more the more it comes back. Meaning that even if you don't if you've always put 100% positivity into the world, that energy, there is still a likelihood that excuse me, that you'll experience something negative in return because somebody else has been putting negativity into the world. So you basically look at it as, well, I could be part of the problem or I could be part of the solution. Maybe I should, instead of contributing to the negativity, try to be part of the positive crew. It may not actively benefit me, but at least I know that it's going to both increase my odds of having positivity coming back to me, but it's also going to make other people's lives a lot less miserable.
Hmm. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways we don't even. It's not possible for us to see how important the decisions that we make in our day to day life really, really is. Like for example, your book, right? I mean, I don't know what kind of feedback it is that you've gotten from your viewers, but I mean, from my perspective, I think when I meet people that are doing something like what you're doing, it's like a huge inspiration.
Nope.
It's a huge inspiration because you realize that one person or a small group of people can do way more than we think that we can.
Hmm.
And what kind of response have you gotten from people? Like, do you have people that come to you and they're just like, oh my god, I love your books. It makes me want to write. It makes me want to get
I
interested in
wish.
these different. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that would definitely make my day. I've had a lot of people on social media take pictures of the book. Basically
Hmm.
either the Amazon edition or the ones that they backed. And I've had people say, I really like the story. I'm looking forward to more. And like that's a huge boost for me as well, because it means not only did they where they care enough to support the first round, but it sounds like they're interested in sticking around for round two. And that ultimately for me, it like, I just hope that I can keep earning that support, where it's like, I love the praise, but I at the end of the day, I just want people to enjoy the story.
Yeah, totally, totally. Cool, man. Well, I don't want to hold you up too much longer. I have enjoyed chatting with you, though. So you wanna give us a plug? I'm gonna include all your links in the description box for anybody who wants to check out your website or your Twitter. But like, what is the best way for people to follow you and to like stay up to date with what you're doing?
Oh yeah. So if you go to the InfinitaleChronicles.com website, that has all the most recent information, and I'm fairly active on X or Twitter at Infinitel Comic. So yeah, those are probably your two best paths to keep up to date on all the latest news. Um,
Okay, cool,
yeah.
cool, man. I appreciate you coming on and chatting with me. To anybody watching this, like I said, all of the links for Chris's stuff will be in the description box below, as well as my own social media and my comics as well. And thanks, guys, for watching.
Thanks for having me.